Hello, welcome to episode 135 of A Stitch in Time. Today is Wednesday, April 1st, 2020. So it's April Fool's Day, but it is well past noon. In fact, it is late afternoon, so I will not be playing any jokes on you today. My name's Carol. You can find me over on Ravelry as Knitsnpurls, and I live here in the Fraser Valley of British Columbia, not too far east of Vancouver. If this is your first time watching, a special hello to you. Thank you for checking out the podcast. And if you are a returning viewer, hello again. Thank you for coming by to spend some time with me once more as I ramble on about knitting and all sorts of things. Before we go any further, I just wanted to let you know how much it meant to me that so many of you reached out to me this past week. I had so many comments on YouTube and in the Ravelry group and private messages. So a huge thank you to all of you. I sense that we're all looking for an even greater sense of community in this uncertain and these unsettled times. And with that in mind, last week I did open up a thread in the Ravelry group called Keep Calm and Craft Along. So if you're feeling in the need of a little bit of company, please come by, introduce yourself, show us what you're working on, and just join in the general conversation. And hopefully we can provide that friendship and community to each other in the days ahead. So I have a couple of a couple of finished projects to share with you this week. And one of them has been 11 years in the making. That is no joke. I cast on this project on the 7th of April 2009, and I cast it off yesterday. So, as many of you know, on Saturday I went through a lot of my hibernating works in progress and made a decision about whether I was going to rip them out, finish them up, or put them back into hibernation for a while I made up my mind. And I recorded that process and put it up as a special episode. So I will provide a link to it at the end of this video. It will be the one you see at the end screen if you're interested in watching it. So one of those projects that I actually had decided to frog is the Silver Birches Shawl by Amy Swenson. And this shawl was part of a club subscription called the Year of Lace. And this was the September 2008 project. So you got the pattern and you got the yarn. And for some reason I didn't cast it on till April 2009, so I'm not really sure why. But looking at my project notes, I had cast it on, then I'd put it down, and I picked it up a couple of different times in 2011 and 2012 and thought I might actually finish it in time for its 3rd anniversary in April of 2012. But I ran into a problem, and that was when I reached the edging. I knit a few rows, and then you have switched to these new charts. And I couldn't get this part to work. And I remember at the time I attempted to contact the designer about it, and I never did hear anything back. So my guess is that I just kind of stalled out on it, put it away, and then I haven't looked at it since until Saturday. And as I said, I had fully intended to frog this project, and when I took it out of its bag and took a little bit closer look, I realized I was almost finished. I had less than 30 rows to go. And I also thought that maybe, considering the last time I looked at it was 8 years ago, that maybe since then my experience may have increased, and maybe I could identify the problem and resolve it. And so I took a closer look, and I did figure out what was wrong. It was an error in the chart, one of the charts, and so I was able to resolve it. So I started knitting on this project again and finished it up. So get business part of it out of the way first. It's knit from this beautiful 2-ply cashmere yarn from Handmaiden. It's 100% cashmere, and this was a color that was specially dyed for the club. It's very light, very soft. And so I knit along, and then I was dismayed to actually find 2 more errors. One in the main chart, and then one on the, there's a column that runs up the spine of the shawl. That's where the original error was, and then I found one later on in that same chart, in the edging chart. So I was it was frustrating, to say the least. But at least I knew what to do about it. So here, I don't know how well this is going to show up, because I know it was a light background, a lot of sunlight shining in here. That's a look at the shawl. You can see it is a fairly large triangular shawl. I believe they call this a Faroese shawl, that has this panel that runs down the center. And I feel as though I did what I was supposed to do with these charts, because you can see that's the tip of the center part of the shawl as shown in the pattern photograph. And this is how mine looks. Actually, I've got a dark bag here. I'm going to put this against, and that will help show off the stitches better. That's how mine turned out. So I feel like the fixes I made were the right ones. So I'm pleased about that. So yeah, I felt it was just such a sense of satisfaction to cast this off yesterday. And then I immediately put it into soak so I could block it. And I was just finishing up blocking, and I spied a hole. And of course it's lace, but it was a hole that wasn't supposed to be there. And then I spied another hole. So looking more closely at one of the holes, you could see couple little really short pieces of yarn. So I knew it hadn't just snapped under pressure from blocking. I realized that some little critter had nibbled on it. It's probably some moth damage. And, you know, it has been sitting for 12 years, or 11 years, I should say, from the beginning. It wasn't a Ziploc bag, but I don't know if it was done up or not. And in any case, in one area it was only 2 strands that had been broken, and in the other area it was only 1. So I took it off the blocking boards this morning, and I took a fine needle and some of the spare yarn, and I did a little repair job, and I'm actually really pleased with how that turned out. So right above this locking stitch marker is where I fixed this this problem, this hole. And then this one's not quite as good. This is where there was a little bit bigger hole, but it's still not that noticeable. There's where I fixed that one. So all in all, a happy ending. I saved this from the frog pond, and I feel very good about that decision. That's where it was destined. I think it turned out beautifully. It is light and airy, soft. The only thing is I don't have, warm and fuzzy feelings about this shawl, if I can use that expression. I'm frustrated that I was prevented from finishing it for so long because of an error in the chart. I'm confused as to why nobody has mentioned it in their Ravelry project comments. There are over 40 shawls that have been at least begun, if not finished. And one person mentioned the error that occurs in the main body of the shawl in the edging, but nobody mentions the two mistakes that occur in that center edging section, and I'm not sure why. In one case, there are the first case, the one that I had to really fiddle with, was that there were too many decreases for the amount of yarn overs that were in that section. And so instead of using up 15 stitches like it should have, it would have consumed 17 stitches, which do not exist, and then things didn't line up and such. So I just changed those decreases to plain knit stitches, and then that worked. The other mistake was that you do your main chart, and then you insert this spine, and it had it so that there were going to be 2 yarn overs in a row, which I knew, every so often you see that in a pattern, but I knew that's not how this was supposed to be. And so I just moved the yarn over, the first and last yarn overs on the center part, a stitch in from the edge, and that solved that problem. So I haven't decided exactly what's going to happen with this. Whether I am going to keep it or whether I am going to give it away to someone. I have someone in mind who I think might like it. Yeah, for as beautiful as it is, I wish I had better feelings about it. But that with time, they may come with time. So anyway, one last look at this lovely shawl. That is, again, the Silver Birches shawl by Amy Swenson. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of tea here. Okay, I have another finished project. These I finished this morning, and that's my plain stockinette socks from Biscot Yarns in their Bis sock base, and this is the Mon Pays c'est l'hiver colorway. My country, it is winter. Now I'm happy to say it looks more like spring than winter out there at the moment, but it actually was quite cool this morning. I think it was 2 degrees, which is like about 34 degrees for those of you more familiar with Fahrenheit. And the snow was quite low down on the mountains. We had some rain yesterday down here, and it fell as snow up there. So winter still has a little bit of a grip on the land, but there are daffodils blooming. Quite a few of the trees have leaves starting to come out. I can see some of my perennials in the garden are getting new leaves at their base. So spring is springing. So I'm glad to finally put winter in more ways than one behind me. I haven't decided whether I'm going to put these into my sock rotation or if I'm going to put them aside away until next winter. If you have been watching, you've seen these several times, but for those of you who haven't, This is a 64 stitch top down sock, 2x2 rib, traditional heel flap and gusset, and a rounded toe. And most of my socks I knit on a 2mm needle. So yeah, that's happy to be done, and it's time to cast on a new pair of stockinette socks. Don't know which ones those are going to be yet, so stay tuned. You'll find out very soon. And speaking of socks, let's move into works in progress. I have completed the first dorsal fin sock. It matches my t-shirt very well, doesn't it? This is the 6 pattern in the Handmade Sock Society 2 collection by Helen Stewart. The yarn is Ocean Wind Knits Sock. I don't know if you can see that label very well. And it's in the Bite colorway, B-I-G-H-T, which is a small bay along a coastline. And as I showed you last week, I'm just going to scooch this sock around. Running up the back of the sock is this dorsal fin motif. Other than that, it's just a plain stockinette sock with a 1x1 twisted rib cuff, traditional heel flap and gusset, plain foot, rounded toe. And I cast on the second sock this morning. I think I've done about 3 rows of ribbing, so I didn't think it was worth bringing it in to show you, but I have started the second one. Normally when I have my project notes, I will keep track of every row that I knit if I'm doing a pair of patterned socks. But with this one, once I finish the gusset decreases, I just knit and didn't keep track. So just before I started the toe, I counted my rows, put in a stitch marker every 10 rows, and then one where I started the toe. So when I go do my second sock, I'll just refer to this for the number of rows I have to knit. I figured that was easier than having to have my notebook with me all the time and marking off each plain round of knitting. So yay for those. So I have one more work in progress to talk about, and I showed you the yarn for this last week as one of my, or as some of my latest acquisitions. So this is the Color Shifting Shawl by Jennifer Fish, and I am knitting it from a new yarn from Knit Picks called Muse. It's a fingering weight 75/25 superwash merino nylon base, and it is dyed in Japan in these beautiful watercolor shades. And so there's one of them right there. I didn't bring them all in. They're in the living room where I work on my projects, but I have gotten off to a pretty good start. Oh, it also goes with my t-shirt. Picked the right thing to wear today. So I have color 1 is Savvy. That moves into color 2, which is Impulse. Color 3, this multicolored one, is called, oh sorry, I misspoke. This is Untamed. This is Impulse. This is Poetic, the purple, and then it will be followed actually by, go back to color 1 again. This turquoise color will go after the purple, and then there's one more color that's a similarly multicolor one like this, only a little bit different shades, and that's what it ends with. So this is, as you can see, mainly garter stitch. It's an asymmetrical shawl, mainly garter stitch, and there are sections of what she calls the easiest lace ever, which is just formed by doing a yarn over, knit 1, all across, and on your way back you drop the yarn over as you knit the stitch, and it just gives you that little bit elongated stitch there. So you know, keeps your interest because you're kind of repeating through different sections, but it's simple enough you can work on it when you're, you know, talking to someone, stuff like that. So yeah, happy with that for sure. So I wanted to talk to you about another shawl from the Year of Lace Yarn Club. And if you were watching Saturday's episode, this is another one that I said I was going to frog. It's called the Berry Beautiful Shawl by Joan Schroeder. It is a stole. I guess actually I think it's called, yeah, Berry Beautiful Summer Stole. And this was from the June 2008 installment of the club. I didn't write down when I started it, but it is in my Ravelry projects page. It's knit from, whoops, excuse me, I dropped it. It is knit from this very blueberry inspired color of lace weight yarn. It is Lorna's Laces, Helen's Lace, which is 50% silk, 50% wool, and this is called Beautiful Berry. Very apt name for it. And I thought that before I took the extreme step of frogging what I have done, I thought I would take a closer look at it and reconsider whether it's something I might finish. Now the shawl is knit, you knit a bottom border, pick up stitches, and you knit more or less a rectangle until you reach the halfway point. You put those stitches on a waste yarn, and then you cast on the other end, repeat the same steps, and then you graft the live edges together in the middle of the stole. So here is that edging. You can see it's kind of a little bit of a point here. Before we needed a dark background for the lace, this time we need a light background. I'll see if that helps. Now, before I recorded, I thought I would knit a couple of rows on it so that I could get a sense of how it goes together, and so I could talk about it a little bit more intelligently. The first thing is I am knitting this on really small needles. This is a 2.25 millimeter needle. The pattern calls for 2.5 millimeter needles, and I think the reason I went even a little smaller, actually I think there's two reasons. One is that I do tend to be a loose knitter, so I often will drop my needle size by 1/4 to 1/2 millimeter. But I also think it's because the first project in this club, a lot of people, including me, ran out of yarn, and they had to dye up some more yarn and send it out to all of us. And I do know that my first shawl ended up being larger than the dimensions described on the pattern. I know I did not swatch because I don't generally swatch for shawls, but I suspect that I partly went down a needle size out of caution to make sure I had enough yarn for the project. So yeah, it's very tiny needles. And then what I also realized is, again, I'll grab this light paper and hopefully that helps. As you go across the shawl, on every right side row, there are multiple charts. So you start out with this leaf border. Then you go into what they call a berry chart. So there's berry chart A. Then you go into a leaf chart. Then you go into berry chart C, which is twice as wide as berry chart A. That's the center of the shawl. Then you do another section of the leaf lace. Then you do berry chart C. And then you finish off with the leaf chart B, I guess. Because the chart at the beginning, the leaf charts at the beginning, and the berry charts at the beginning and end of the row are basically sitting in opposite directions. Thankfully, the wrong side rows are all just purl back rows. So you do have that rest row. Hopefully that gives you a good look. It's just hard getting it, the lighting, to be able to show you just how intricate and beautiful this lace is. But as you might have guessed, this is not one of those projects that you can sit down and get into a rhythm and work yourself away across a row. Like the other shawl I just showed you, the Silver Birches shawl. This one takes a lot of concentration. And because the needles are so small, it does not work up very quickly. I think I'm supposed to do 15 repeats of the lace pattern for each side, each end of the shawl. I think I'm on 10 or 11, I think 11 of the first side. So that's how much I've done. So it's a long way from being finished. So I'm just going to possibly work on this a little bit this week. Try and get a better sense of whether it's a project I can truly see myself seeing through to the end. It is gorgeous. Can you imagine if I did finish this and how beautiful it would be once it was all blocked? I mean, it is stunning. I just don't know if I'm there right now. If I really want something this complicated. So stay tuned. You may see this make another appearance in the near or the far future. But I mean, it is gorgeous. There's no denying that. One viewer did ask me if rather than frogging it, if I could convert it into a cowl and sew the beginning and the end together, I guess like this. There would probably be enough yarn. It sits not super loosely, but actually quite a nice amount around my neck. What makes me hesitate is that it does have this border that kind of goes around the whole thing, and it is in a curved, has a curve at the end. So I'm not sure how well the two ends would sew together. So I probably would not do that, but who knows, maybe I'll breathe some new life into this old project. The more I look at it, the more tempted I am to do that. So I'm glad I also have potentially rescued that from the frog pond. As for most of the other projects that I did decide to frog, I've already started that process. I started off on Saturday afternoon and then carried over into Sunday. And so most of those projects have been frogged. I take a sip of tea. What I did for most of them is I rewound them onto my, oh, excuse me, I have to pick something up here. Slid off. Most of the projects I unwound onto my ball winder, made a, a cake like this, And then I proceeded to wind off the cake onto my Swift so that I could make a skein. And I tied it up with waste yarn. And then I soaked it in a bucket with some little bit of wool wash, lukewarm water. And that helped it to relax, get rid of all the kinks that had, formed while knitting. And now that it's dry, I'll put a label on it so I don't forget what it is. I'll put the labels back on, but I'll just wind them back into, skeins, kind of like this. Oh, easier said than done, apparently. Oh, definitely easier said than done. Now I'm determined to do it and do it right. So you're going to have to bear with me. There we go. From what I understand, it's better to store yarn like this rather than like this when you can. Apparently this stretches the yarn. I don't know if it's true, but this is how I will store, yarn after I have frogged and rewashed it. I am grateful that I did not receive any kind of nasty comments from people who were put off by the number of hibernating works in progress I have. It is a very personal thing, of course, and we all have our own level of tolerance for it. I don't think any of us ever set out to end up with that many. It happens. One viewer very eloquently put it as I was setting my needles free, and I thought that was a lovely way to express it. But I do have to say it's given me quite a sense of relief to have some of those projects no longer like weighing on me as, oh, I really should finish it, I really should finish it. And already I see the new potential in my old yarn. And so I don't have any regrets about doing that. This Sunday I was really happy. Cameron, I know I've said this before, he's been working long days and extra days through the last few weeks, so I was pleased that Sunday he had entirely off, other than a very brief exchange with one of his store managers regarding a staff member. He didn't have to do any work on Sunday. Was happy about that for him. He has agreed. I have several sweaters that need frogging, but they're knit with like 3 alternating skeins of yarn, and they're very tricky to unwind. So he did say he would help me with those, but didn't end up happening on Sunday, very understandably. But yeah, so we just had a very lazy, quiet Sunday. It's one thing when you're not supposed to go out, except for, unless absolutely necessary. Not very much exciting goes on. But that's okay. Thankfully, I for the most part, am quite happy to stay at home and got loads to keep me busy here, but I do know other people are finding it a little more difficult, and I feel for them, because it's one thing to choose to stay home and cocoon. It's another when it's thrust upon you, especially if it's not really in your nature. We FaceTimed with my daughter and her family on Sunday. That's the first time that that either of us have tried FaceTime. And it was really cool. Those of you who are much more tech savvy than I am already know that. Yeah, Jessica kind of walked the phone around the house and left it with one kid or another. We had a little chat with them, and they're all fine. Both Jessica and her husband are still working outside the home, but they're obviously, their places of employment are obviously also taking what measures they can to ensure safe distancing and things like that. So let's just hope all those measures pay off. I don't know if I already said this. Thankfully, neither my husband nor I, or I don't think anyone, even in my family, we were talking about it the other day, I don't think any of us know anyone personally who has been infected with COVID-19. To my knowledge, it has not entered our community, not that I know of, which is not to say it may not be coming, but that helps to settle some of the anxiety. Definitely my levels go up and down, but I really do try and concentrate on trying to keep myself at as even a keel as possible. Speaking of, though, I had a nice long talk with my mom yesterday afternoon. And earlier that day, she told us something rather disturbing. On Friday night, she was online reading one of small regional newspapers from her greater area. She lives in a little small, very small town, but part of a region, like most of us are. And in any case, there was an article in there that said, if you've been in this particular pharmacy, in this particular grocery store, on one of these particular days, you should quarantine for 14 days. And my mom said it was like something had kicked her in the stomach, because she in fact had been in that pharmacy department on one of those days. Now, thankfully, she had been self-isolating since that time. And so her quarantine period actually ends today. She has no symptoms. She's fine. Some typical mom, mind you, we're all kind of the same. She didn't want to tell any of us about it until she knew all the details. And so over the course of the weekend and into Monday, I guess, she learned that apparently an employee in that pharmacy department had been ill, but did not have COVID-19, and the reporter or newspaper or both kind of jumped the gun in reporting about it without verifying the facts. And so while we're all relieved that my mom was not, to our knowledge, exposed to COVID-19, she and a number of other people have experienced some unnecessary anxiety over thinking they have been. And apparently, if in fact the pharmacy knew that people had been exposed, she would have been contacted about it regardless. But one of her friends happened to be in the same place that day. This is an hour and a half drive away from where my mom lives, but it's their closest major center, city center. One of her friends in town happened to be there the same day. She had only taken a product off one of the shelves, as opposed to my mom, who was actually having a prescription filled. But how do you contact those people? So anyway, happy ending to the story, but it's sort of a word of warning, I guess, that in this time to be just really cautious about what you're reading and being aware that there can be misinformation out there, and to try not to react too strongly unless you know something's true. I guess that's true at any time, but most especially now. And on that cheery note, I think that's all I have for you today. Thank you, as always, for watching. Really appreciate all your kind support now and during the last several years that I've been doing this. I wish you all the very, very best of health as we go through this. Stay safe out there, and barring any unforeseen circumstances, I'll be back next week to talk to you again and hopefully have some progress to show you on some projects. Might even have some new projects, considering I just finished a pair of socks. I think it's time to cast on a new one. Yeah, so take care until then. I'll see you soon.